Hi, this video is on conditional sentences to Oxford Latin chapter 44. A conditional sentence is one that has an if clause in it. You've seen a number of them before. In Latin, they would be si clauses or nisi, meaning if not. They're pretty straightforward when they have verbs that are in the indicative. The trick here that we're going to learn today is what happens when they get subjunctive verbs in them. Let's take a look at examples that we've already seen. Conditions have three different types. Actually, all conditions have three different types. They have past conditions, present conditions, and future conditions. Here are some examples that we've seen. If it pleases you, I will summon Decimus. Like at present tense, archesam, future tense, no problems there. Same thing in the next two examples. Quintus, however, is foolish if he has joined himself to Brutus. Notice in this one that the if part comes after the main clause. That can happen, and sometimes that can be a little tricky. But here, not a big deal. You're translating it straight up. And then the last example from chapter 40, Brutus was defeated if he was forced to make the sons of freedmen tribunes. All of these indicate factual statements. Either the thing happened or it didn't. To the subjunctive, however, that will be a little bit different. Let's get there now. When the subjunctive is used in a condition, it takes the conversation out of the factual world and then into the imaginary world. You have hypothetical situations, and the Latin powers that be refer to these statements as contrary to fact statements. That is, they are contrary to what is happening or did happen. Here are some examples. If Quintus had joined himself to Octavian, note the implication, he didn't, he would have been smart. If Quintus were smart, implication is that he's not, he would try to find his parents. And the last one, if it should please you, but I'm sure it won't, I would summon Decimus. Let's take a closer look at these different types. In the past, if Quintus had joined himself to Octavian, he would have been smart. It's clearly implied that Quintus didn't join Octavian. The sentence explains an imaginary situation that happened in the past, and so we call this type a past contrary to fact condition. How they're put together in Latin. Latin puts both of those verbs into the pluperfect tense. So that seems like it's one tense past what it should be. So here's the Latin, and we read it. If Quintus had joined himself to Octavian, he would have been smart. If he had joined, junxisset, he would have been fuisset. Translating the first verb is not a big deal, since it sounds like it's pluperfect anyway. The second one's a little bit trickier in conditional clauses because here and in other tenses we're going to put a would in. That's the thing to remember there. Let's take a look at the present tense. Present tense conditions are also called contrary to fact when they are subjunctive. If Quintus were smart, but he's not, so it's imaginary, he would not try to find his parents. Here again, he implies that the Quintus is not smart, and he's talking about right now. This condition, present contrary to fact, as we said. Note the use of were here. If Quintus were smart, right in there. Many people nowadays find this confusing because you could say if you were, if I were, if he were, if they were. There's always this were. This were is the last vestige of the subjunctive in English. If you use was, it indicates a past and factual situation. So down here I have some examples. If he were rich, when I say that I'm talking about right now, and it implied is that he's not rich. If he was in the house, it was really loud, talking about the past and a factual situation. The if in the second example is almost like a whenever. Whenever he was in the house, it was really loud. Present conditions in Latin. Here's the cool but possibly spelled correctly, confusing thing. We have always seen that we use the helping verb were with the imperfect tense. In conditions, subjunctive conditions, we still use the imperfect tense in these contrary to fact conditions. The sentence above would be translated, would be si quintus intelligens esset, parentes invenire non temptaret. So if Quintus were smart, so we're still translating this guy as if it were imperfect, even though it is a present condition. So the tenses are being kind of pushed forward more and more towards the future. So if you see the imperfect subjunctive in a condition, translate it were. The potentially confusing thing we'll say here is that the sentence is talking about a present tense situation. Also note that the verb in the main clause, which here is second, we translate as would. Let's go on to the next thing, future conditions. These are called future less vivid conditions. An example would be, if it should please you, but I'm sure it won't, I would summon Decimus. In the future, we can't talk about factual versus imaginary because they haven't happened yet. So what the subjunctive means here is that the speaker doesn't really think that it's going to happen. When I say less vivid, it's less vivid, less likely, less lively in the mind of the speaker. So when I say if it should please you, that's where the but I'm sure it won't. In the indicative, that's called a future more vivid condition, and it's like if it pleases you, either it does or it doesn't. You know, I as the speaker don't really care one way or another. I really don't know. That's future more vivid. Some texts, like Ecce Romani, for example, call future less vivid conditions should-would conditions because those are the helping verbs that we use when we make the sentences. Sometimes, like in Oxford, you may see were to instead of the should, as in if it were to please you. This may be confusing because they're throwing that were thing in there, and if you want to avoid that, I would understand. The examples here, si tibi placeat decimum arcesam. Note this arcesam is subjunctive, whereas in the indicative sentence it was future. The form for the first person singular is the same. But you could translate this, if it should please you, I would summon Decimus, or if it were to please you, I would summon Decimus. Those are both future things. Moving on here. Mixed conditions. Conditional statements in Latin can also have two different tenses, and so they call these mixed conditions. This is getting a little more complicated, so in the beginning of learning subjunctive conditions, you won't deal with these too much. I just want to let you know that when you get to the real Latin, the real stuff, these are some things that can happen. Here in this condition, we have a subjunctive verb in the if part and an imperfect verb in the then part or the main clause. So if Quintus had joined himself to Octavian a long time ago, he would be safe right now. So the first part talks about a past thing, and the main clause talks about a present thing. So it's a mixed condition. This particular example translates pretty well, and it's probably pretty clear to us as speakers of English, as we say down here. However, not only can Latin mix tenses, but sometimes Latin can even mix subjunctive and indicative. Again, that's getting into stuff that's pretty technical, so no need to worry about that right now. So to summarize, this little chart you could use as a guideline for your helping verbs. The key in subjunctive conditions is to use the proper helping verb. I've got the time of the condition right here, tense of the Latin verb, the helping verb for the if part, helping verb for the main clause. If you see a pluperfect verb in the first part, the if part, you translate it had, if he had gone, if he had been there. The helping verb for the main clause would be a would have. He would have gone to town. If you see an imperfect in the if part, you translate it were. If I were rich. If I were walking along the park at the time. Right? If I see the imperfect in the main clause, translate it would. If you, for a future less vivid condition, if I see the present subjunctive, you could translate it would, or you could do were to if you wanted to, or you could just stick to the should. Note that these two guys right here pretty tricky because this one is imperfect. You translate it would. This one is going to be present. I still translate it would. The confusing thing here could be that, okay, this guy's pluperfect, but it's just past. This guy's imperfect. Imperfect subjunctive indicates present. Present subjunctive indicates a future condition. So if that confuses you, you might think of the Latin tenses as being promoted in time. The most important thing is using the correct helping verbs right here. It takes a little while to get used to classifying them correctly, but that's the main thing. Get those helping verbs. That's about it. Thanks very much.